And for analysis now, we have Temitope Omoshi, investment strategist, AfriInvest Asset Management. Great to have you on the program. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Ladi.
Yeah, so quite impressive growth numbers we see there. Seems to have beat some expectations, even that of the IMF and Bloomberg consensus. What are your thoughts on this?
That's quite interesting, actually, to see that, Nigeria economy grew by 3.4% in 2021, and it was as a result of the significant growth we saw in the fourth quarter. Growth was about 3.98%. That's quite commendable, actually, because, like you said, it exceeded a number of analyst expectations, the IMF and the World Bank, and one could actually allude the performance to what we saw in the telecommunications space, especially. In addition to that, we could also look at support from the government. We shouldn't deny the fact that, during the COVID-19, government supported the economy a lot. And one thing with economic policy is that there's a lag effect. There's what we call impact lag and response lag. That is when government responds to an economy and when the impact is felt by the people. Because most times people will say, oh, government said they have spent so amount of money, but we are not seeing the impact. In fact, we are not even seeing the, numbers improving. So that could also be the impact of what we are currently seeing. And again, I think it's also very important to note that according to what, the MBS said as well, this is the fastest growth since 2015 when the economy grew by 2.8%. I think that's quite applaudable. But I think a concern for me, or another question would be that as Nigeria economic growth now back, is the economy back to pre-pandemic levels? Or can we say that the output gap that was created during economic recession has been properly filled? So what I mean by output gap is, when there's a kind of shock in an economy, it creates what we call negative output gap. So a negative output gap is when an economy is performing below the potential. That is, potential is up, actual is below. So at that point, it results to high unemployment and other negative impact of, when you have that kind of poor output gap. So, but a bit of analysis actually explains a lot about Nigeria's output gap. So, for instance, in the last 10 years, Nigeria average growth is about 2.6%, right? So, if you assume that there was no COVID-19 in 2020, the impact did not affect the economy. So, you would say that the economy was expected to grow by 2.6% or 2.5% on the average.
Because some say it's, because of the base year effect.
Yes, the base year effect also contributed. But when you look at that, I'm even talking from the angle of if we are fully recovered and if we have recovered the gains that, that we lost in 2020 now. So if you look at that, currently, the real GDP should be at about 75 trillion naira, and what we have is about 72. Fine, base effects supported the performance we saw, and quite applaudable. In fact, we should be looking at about 6-7% GDP growth, because this performance is not an outlier. If you agree with me, because the US, Europe and a number of advanced economies, even some emerging markets, recorded their best growth ever this year because of, what you just mentioned now, the base effect. It was just like a cheap performance, like you have been given extra mark. Like you got extra mark, 30 mark, and, it's very easy to have 80, 90, 100%. So that was what COVID-19 did to every economy in 2020 and what is currently doing to economy.
It's not time to be excited.
No, like I said, I said the output gap is still quite wide. The negative output gap is about 3 trillion. So, in fact, the government is still needed to support the economy. I know that we've seen a number of support in recent times from the Central Bank of Nigeria and from the Fiscal Authority, but there's still output gap because unemployment is still quite high, although we know we don't have recent figures. But if you tell people on the street that, your economy is growing by 3%, they wonder that, what, we are not seeing the impact on inflation. They cannot even feel this. It's because we are not growing at that potential. For instance, if someone may ask you that, what's the optimal growth? What should we be looking at? You should cast our mind back to between 2010 to 2015. So, because at that level, unemployment was below 10%. So growth rate at that period could actually give you a sense of how Nigeria economy should be growing. So those periods we had about average growth of 6%. So if you want an inclusive growth is, a kind of growth that creates jobs, because growth is just a number. What people want is an inclusive one that can affect welfare. People have jobs and welfare improves. So we could also look at the sectoral performance as well, although that is a bit interesting because you observe that about 13 sectors actually improved compared to about 5 that declined.
Before we go there now, can this growth be sustained, going forward?
Well, I think it can actually, but it's a tall order. Because, like I said, base effect supported what we saw in 2021. To have a very high growth or even at least 3% in 2022 is going to require significant amount of fiscal and monetary policy support. You know, because the economy lost 1.9% in 2020 and it gained 3.4%. So if you are to discount 1.9 that was lost, you have barely up to 2% growth. So, in fact, you know, it has even raised the bar. 2021 has raised the bar. So if you want to exceed what you have in 2021, you have to grow faster, which means there has to be concerted effort by government, monetary, and fiscal authority to ensure that, you know, real sectors of the economy is supported through, you know, addressing problems around ease of doing business, you know, policy uncertainty, and a number of other issues that the manufacturing sector and other important sectors of the economy are grappling with.
Right. And talking about inflation, I saw a very interesting question recently. Somebody asked, is inflation too big for the MPC to solve?
Not too big, because when you look at factors that drive inflation, you cannot actually absolve the central bank or the monetary policy authority from what is currently affecting inflation. Three factors are majorly affecting inflation in Nigeria. You look at the money supply, you also look at structural factors that is outside the CBN purview, and you know, you also look at other factors, basically. But those are the three, and importantly, exchange rate I need to mention. Money supply, structural factors, and exchange rate. Exchange rate and money supply are within the purview of the central bank. Why the structural factors, for instance, what we saw in 2019, August, when the border was closed, was a directive from the fiscal side. But what we saw in 2020, when multiple exchange rate was created, was the CBN. Increase in money supply, ways and means advanced to the government is from the CBN. So, as much as most times you always look at inflation as if, oh, it's cost push and it's outside the purview of the central bank. No, central bank and the Monetary Policy Authority even have a lot to do in the equation of inflation trajectory in Nigeria. So it's not actually outside the purview of the monetary policy.
What about inflation from, you know, global economies? That also, you know, transcends into this emerging economies.
You mean Nigeria, right?
Yes, like Nigeria.
So, yes, when you look at the substance, which is why the exchange rate factor comes into play. However, I always emphasize that when you analyze Nigeria's inflation, sometimes it's not just about the exchange rate, right? Which now reduces the impact of, you know, what is happening globally on Nigeria's inflation. Because look at inflation, Nigeria inflation basket, the CPI basket, 60% is just imported food inflation. 52% is local food inflation, which is why if you do a kind of correlation analysis, look at exchange rate and inflation in Nigeria, you will see that you won't find sufficient, you know, correlation compared to, you look at August 2019, we had a kind of shock, border closure. Something happened, there was NSAS protest in October, you know, of 2020, restriction to COVID-19 in March. You will see that there were jumps in these periods, and these periods could not be linked to a major devaluation of the currency. So what I'm saying in essence is that though we would consider what is happening globally, but the most driver of Nigeria's inflation is largely within the economy, cost push, and some kind of policy uncertainties around, you know, the two policymakers in the country.
It's more within. Okay, let's look at contributors now. Sector. I see transport was the most impressive. What do you think drove that?
Well, transport sector, I think that is quite impressive. And when you look at what is currently happening in Lagos to the rail transport, you know, a lot of people have started picking interest in it. In fact, I think about a month ago, I did an analysis of rail transport, the revenue. It increased by 3 times. Because a lot of people found it very, very convenient, and I'm sure you must have had positive comments. You know, the rail transport from Lagos to Ibadan, a lot of people are using it now. So I think that also contributed to what we saw in transport. In addition to the aviation sector, you know, one of the hardest hit sector during the COVID-19 was the aviation sector, because people could not move out of the country. They couldn't move into the country, and restrictions to COVID-19. But because, you know, a number of countries have now relaxed some of those restrictions, I think that also affected what we saw in the transport sector. So altogether, I think the transport sector is actually coming out from the waters.
And also we have the wholesale and retail trade sector. You know, despite, you know, this recovery. We're still seeing structural challenges there, but it's quite an impressive move there.
Yeah, actually very interesting. I think, the dynamics of the Nigeria economy and the global economy is changing in the light of what you just said. They are now more flexible, wholesale and the wholesale and retailers, because they leverage telecommunication technology. Before now you have to go to a physical market, but with social media, on Twitter and a number of other platforms, they can market their products, they can connect customers, so there are no limitations. Even despite the restriction we saw in 2020, they still did a bit better. And, they've actually created a kind of resilient and means challenges, so which is why we saw that positive numbers.
And you did mention telecoms, but telecoms didn't do well.
Well, didn't do well, but it actually grew by about 6%. And in fact, we should hinge most of the growth we've seen other sectors of the economy to telecommunication sector. In fact, interestingly, before 2022, or let me say before 2010 to be precise,
right.
There was a major kind of revolution in the telecommunication space. We saw in 1997 to 1999, we saw deregulation of the telecommunication space, right? After that period, telecommunication only contributed less than 5% to the economy, but currently it contributes about 14%. In fact, during COVID-19, the sector grew very well, performed positively well. And if you look at the numbers of even telecommunication companies, from the MTN to Airtel, the profitability grew by over 40%. So telecommunication grew by 6%, so that's still quite impressive compared to even the overall growth. So I think the telecommunication is strong and is supporting other areas of the economy that, that needs to be resilient.
Quite interesting. But, let's go back to inflation. Now, do you think, a single-digit inflation is realistic, let's say, in the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, nothing is unrealistic if you have the right policies. For instance, it's already predicted that this year, inflation will average about 13% if there are no major shocks in the economy. With the right policy, like I said, addressing the component of inflation, we talk about food. Food alone accounts for 52% of inflation in Nigeria. In terms of even consumption spending, it accounts for close to 56%. So if we're able to address, challenges to food, food supply, I think a single digit is not possible, so it's not far-fetched.
All right. So looking at the economy now, what's your outlook for 2022?
So looking at the economy here, that's quite interesting. So we're looking at about 2.5% to 2.7% growth this year.
And considering election years next year?
Yes. Yeah. Investors are very wise, intelligent. They must have priced whatever will happen in the Nigeria economy into their investment, plans. In fact, when you look at Nigeria's capital importation, you observe that foreign investors are not coming in as such, and the ones that want to exit the economy must have done that. So the ones that we have here are committed to the economy. So we won't see major shock on, the economy that would really affect GDP negatively. In fact, Nigeria's economy, in terms of the GDP, consumption spending is about 60%. So it is just very important for us to continue to enhance consumption, I think, which is why government is always after, the social programs, so as to ensure that people have money to spend. It's not just about foreign investors. In fact, investors are now very apprehensive globally because of so many uncertainties. You see what is currently happening between Ukraine and Russia, and U.S. policy uncertainties as well. Inflation is eating the roof. So everybody is, quite confused. Investors are even sitting on the, on the sideline. So for the Nigerian economy, with the base factor, what is currently driving the economy is even the non-oil sectors. So, in a way, we are even immune to some of the oil price shock. We're not even benefiting from what is currently happening in the global rally. Yeah. So we are not benefiting from it. If you look at the non-oil sector, it grew by 4%, while oil sector went down by about 8%. So it tells you that the structure of the economy is changing, although we want a balanced growth. A balanced growth is where you have both non-oil sector and oil sector contributing significantly to the economy. So basically, I think with just normal activities, we should be able to have up to 2.7% growth this year.
All right. Well, how do you see, investors in the capital market reacting to these figures?
Well, investors will look at sectors. I mentioned the importance of telecommunication sector. They will look at transport sector. So recently we've seen the importance of telecommunication sector in the Nigerian market from the MTN and Airtel, and a lot of investors are even upbeat when it comes to their valuation. So they will continue to look at sectors, these sectors, in addition to the industrial sector, particularly the Dangote cement, the Boat cement, because once there's increase in fiscal policy, once government has proposed that there's going to be more spending on capital projects, you know that government will definitely demand cement. And what happens? There's going to be interest in Dangote cement, Boa Cement, and WAPCO. So they will just look at the GDP numbers and look at sectors that grew the most. That could also shape their opinion as to which sector to put their money in 2022. And
they also have to consider, the risk of rate hikes,
Yes, but one thing with Nigeria, like I said, is actually peculiar. Okay. Our case is peculiar. Yeah. A number of persons or analysts would have told you that maybe when rates is increased in the US and other advanced economy, could lead to capital outflow. But like I told you earlier, the level of capital we have in Nigeria now, they are already locked in the economy. The only thing is that we won't have much of the inflows. Okay. And the kind of inflation we're looking at in Nigeria is going to be on a decelerating mode. So the CBN will not be under, pressure to increase rates.
Right. All right. We'll keep watching. You see how the MPC plans to handle all of this. All right. Temitope Omoshi, investment strategist, AfriInvest Asset Management. It was great having you today.
Thank you so much.